The survey was supposed to take 11 days. I want to establish the timeline clearly, because the timeline is the part that still does not make sense when I lay it against everything else I can document. We arrived at the Crale Basin access point on a Monday in early September. We were scheduled to complete the primary survey corridors by the following Thursday and exit by Friday afternoon, giving us a 2-day buffer for the kind of delays that cave survey work produces routinely. Equipment calibration, unexpected formation requiring additional documentation, the slow and careful process of moving through spaces that have never been mapped in detail and do not yield their geometry quickly. We exited on Wednesday, 9 days in, 2 days ahead of schedule, with 4 fewer people than we had entered with. I am the only member of the survey team who has given any account of what happened inside the Crale system. I am aware that this makes my account both the primary record and a source of considerable skepticism from people who were not there. I understand the skepticism. I have applied it to my own account in the 11 months since we came out, and I have not found a place where it holds up against what I can document. The documentation is clear, the events are not. My name is Dr. Renata Voss. I am a karst geomorphologist, a specialist in cave and limestone terrain systems, at a regional university I am not going to name, because I am still employed there and I have no interest in what naming it would do to my position. I was the scientific lead on the Crale Basin survey. The project was commissioned by a private geological consulting firm contracted to assess the Crale system for a water resource study. Groundwater flow, aquifer capacity, the standard work that generates about 30% of applied cave research in the United States. The Crale Basin is a cave system in eastern Tennessee in the karst terrain of the Cumberland Plateau. It is not famous. It is not particularly notable among cave researchers, which is part of why it had not been comprehensively surveyed since a partial mapping effort in 1978. The 1978 survey covered approximately 40% of the accessible system before the team ran out of funding and time. Their maps were adequate for the era, hand-drawn station surveys with compass and tape, a methodology we have largely replaced with digital instrumentation, but incomplete. Our brief was to complete what the 1978 team had started: to survey the unmapped portions of the system, integrate them with the existing maps, and produce a comprehensive document of the cave's extent and hydrological characteristics. There was a section of the 1978 maps that I had noticed during my pre-survey review. In the deeper portion of the system, past what the original team called the lower gallery, a broad cathedral siling chamber approximately 900 meters from the entrance. The maps showed a passage heading northeast that terminated, after perhaps 50 meters of drawn corridor, in a notation I had not seen in this form before. The notation was a double line across the passage width, with a short text label beside it. The label read, "Passage continues, not surveyed. Do not proceed beyond this point." Caving surveys use standard notation. Passages that were not surveyed are notated as dashed lines indicating estimated continuation. Passages that are blocked by rockfall, water sumps, passages too narrow to enter, have specific symbols for each obstruction type. A double line with a text structure was not standard notation. It was a personal note from the surveyor, addressed presumably to anyone who came after I noted it. I filed it in the section of my pre-survey documentation labeled Anomalies Requiring In-Person Assessment. I did not think about it extensively. Survey work generates these small mysteries regularly, a notation that made perfect sense in context that has been lost over 45 years, a surveyor's in-joke, a passage that turned out to be a dead end that someone found objectionable enough to exclude from the map. There are dozens of explanations for an unusual notation that do not require unusual explanations. My team was 4 people, including me. The field lead was Marcus Dreer, no relation to anyone I have mentioned previously, which I note only because his name will appear repeatedly and I want to be clear about who he was. Marcus was 41, had been doing cave survey work for 17 years, and had the methodical, unflappable quality that kind of experience produces in people who are suited to it. He did not dramatize things. He was the person on a team you calibrated your own responses against. If Marcus found something worth remarking on, it was worth remarking on. The photographer and secondary surveyor was Jill Parrish, 29, 3 years of cave experience and a particular skill for the kind of close-quarters macro photography that documents cave formations in detail. She was precise and quiet and kept meticulous notes. The safety coordinator was Tom Okafor, 53, retired from underground mining operations and brought onto cave survey teams for the specific value of someone who has spent decades thinking about the ways that underground spaces kill people and how to prevent that. Tom had the particular manner of someone who has seen enough that very little surprises him, and who applies this experienced equanimity not as performance, but as genuine disposition. 4 people, 1 entrance, 1 survey objective, 11 days of supplies. The first 3 days were entirely routine. We established our base camp in the entry chamber, a standard procedure, creating a dry, organized supply depot as close to the cave entrance as practical before moving equipment deeper. We ran the first survey corridors of the main gallery, integrating our digital station data with the 1978 map points that we could verify, noting where the old survey had been accurate and where it had accumulated the small errors that 45 years of cartographic interpretation produce. The cave itself was a good cave in the professional sense. Geologically interesting, technically accessible, with the kind of formation density that produces useful data for water resource studies. Flowstone deposits, active drip sites, a clear pattern of water movement that told a coherent story about the aquifer system above. Marcus moved through it with the steady efficiency of someone who has done this 100 times, and Jill documented, and Tom kept his assessments running in the background of everything. Checking anchors, evaluating passage stability, noting the places where the sealing geology warranted attention. I surveyed and wrote and processed data in the evenings by headlamp at the camp table, and the work was the kind of absorbing that fieldwork is when it is going well. On the 4th day, we reached the lower gallery. The original 1978 maps had described it accurately. A broad chamber, roughly oval in plan, with a ceiling high enough that our headlamps did not fully illuminate it. The chamber had 3 passage entrances. The main gallery we had come through, a lower-level crawl passage that clearly led to a water table level we would document separately, and the northeast passage. The passage with the double line notation. I stood at the entrance to the northeast passage on the afternoon of the 4th day and looked into it. It was a standard walking height passage, perhaps 1.8 meters tall, 2 meters wide, with a flat gravel floor and limestone walls that showed the typical scalloping of historical water flow. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained a surveyor's personal instruction not to proceed. Tom was beside me. "That's the one on the old map," he said. "Yes." He looked into the passage with his standard assessment attention. "What did they say about it?" "Just the notation, no explanation in the survey notes." He was quiet for a moment. "Air movement?" I held up my hand. There was a faint but consistent airflow from the passage. Cool, dry, without the mineral smell that active water passages carry. This indicated the passage continued to a significant extent. Dead-end passages do not produce sustained airflow. "It goes somewhere," I said. "It goes somewhere," he agreed. We made the decision that was, professionally, the correct decision. We would document the junction and proceed into the northeast passage the following day, rested, with full equipment. We had surveyed in unknown passages many times. This was the work. That evening, Marcus noted something in the passage entrance while we were packing down. He had gone back to the junction to take a compass bearing for the following day's work. Standard pre-survey preparation, and he stood there for a moment, compass in hand, and then came back to where Jill and I were working. "The airflow changed," he said. "Changed how?" I said. "It's gone. There's no airflow now." Jill looked up from her notes. "Temperature shift in the upper system sometimes closes off air circulation." "I know," Marcus said. He had the expression of someone who has acknowledged the most likely explanation and is holding it against something that doesn't quite fit. "It's probably that." He paused. "It felt more like it stopped than faded." "Meaning what?" I said. He picked up his notebook. "Meaning nothing. It's probably a temperature thing. I'm noting it." He noted it. We went to sleep. In the morning, the airflow had resumed. I want to be clear about the pace of what followed. It did not happen quickly. It did not announce itself. It assembled itself from details across the next 4 days in the way that problems in underground environments sometimes do. Each detail individually explicable, the accumulation of them producing a pattern that the individual details obscure until you are far enough in to see the shape. On the 5th day, we entered the northeast passage. The passage extended, as the airflow had suggested, much further than the 1978 survey had implied. We surveyed 240 meters of corridor before the day's light budget required us to turn back. The passage was unremarkable in geological terms. Consistent limestone formation, minimal speleotum development, the gravel and silt floor giving way to bare rock as we moved deeper. The walls showed evidence of historical flood events. High water marks, deposited sediment lines at ceiling height in one section. But the passage was currently dry and had been dry for what the geology suggested was a significant period. At 190 meters into the passage, we reached the double line. Not the notation on the map, the actual physical marker in the cave. 2 lines of old paint, the kind of survey marker used in the 1970s before reflective tape became standard, applied directly to the cave wall in white. They crossed the full width of the passage at floor and ceiling height, forming a visible barrier. Beside the right-hand wall, at eye level, the 1978 surveyor had used a paint marker to write in block letters, "Stop, do not proceed." Below that, in smaller letters that the 45 intervening years had faded almost to illegibility, "We don't know what happens here." Marcus and I stood at the line and looked at it. "Dramatic," he said, in the tone he used when he was being precise rather than dismissive. "They came this far," I said. "They painted this." They turned around and didn't explain it in the survey notes. No. Jill was documenting the marker with her camera. Tom was looking at the passage ahead, which continued clearly past the paint line, in the same dimensions and character it had maintained for the past 190 meters. "I can see 60 meters from here," Tom said. "Nothing structurally concerning." We stood at the line for a moment. "We're going through," I said. It was not a question. "Yes," said Marcus. We stepped over the paint line. "What I want to tell you is that something happened immediately. That there was a discernible change, a detectable shift, something that our instruments or our bodies registered as different. The honest account is that there was not. The passage continued exactly as it had. Same dimensions, same geology, same floor, same ceiling, same airflow, steady and consistent on our faces. We surveyed for another hour past the marker line, covering approximately 90 additional meters of passage before the day's light budget required the return. The passage showed nothing that the preceding 240 meters had not shown. We turned around and walked back through the marker line and out through the lower gallery and back to camp. We ate. We processed data. Tom inspected our equipment, his nightly routine, and found nothing requiring attention. I went to sleep without noting anything that distinguished the day from the preceding 4. In the morning, Jill was not at breakfast. This is the moment I have spent the most time with. Not because it was the most alarming. In retrospect, it was not at the time alarming at all. Cave teams wake at different hours. People move around camp. Jill was an early riser who sometimes worked on her photography documentation before the rest of us were active. I noted her absence from the breakfast table and noted that her sleeping mat was empty and noted that her primary headlamp and camera pack were gone. And I concluded that she had risen early and was working somewhere in the entry chamber. I did not find her in the entry chamber. I found her camera pack, suspended from the equipment hang point on the chamber wall, exactly where she would have hung it if she were going somewhere within the cave that did not require photographic documentation. Her primary headlamp was not in the pack and was not in the chamber. Her backup headlamp, which she kept in her personal kit, was in her sleeping kit. I looked at Tom. Tom looked at the camera pack. "She went somewhere," he said. He had the specific, careful expression of someone who has encountered an anomaly in an underground environment and is giving it his complete, undivided attention. "Without her camera," I said. "Without her camera," he agreed. We called her name into the main gallery passage. The cave returned our voices in the particular way of cave acoustics. A short, hard echo, then silence. No response. Marcus was awake by then. We gave it 30 minutes, calling at intervals, before the 3 of us made the decision to sweep the accessible passages. Tom took the crawl passage toward the lower level. Marcus and I moved into the main gallery. We called as we moved. We checked every junction, every side passage, every feature significant enough that a person might have stopped to examine it. We swept for 2 hours. We did not find Jill. We found, at the junction with the lower gallery, a single boot print in the silt floor that matched Jill's boot size and tread pattern, pointing in the direction of the northeast passage. Marcus and I looked at the boot print. "She went in," Marcus said. His voice had the quality it had the night before, when he had noted the airflow change, acknowledging the most likely explanation while holding it against something. "At night," I said, "alone, without her camera." Yes, there was no version of this that constituted standard behavior for an experienced caver. People do not enter unknown passages alone, at night, without informing their team. Jill was experienced. She knew this. She had been practicing it without exception for 3 days. We called down the northeast passage. Our voices returned to us. We made the decision to go in after her. This was not a complicated decision. A team member was in an unknown passage. But Tom, before we entered, ran through a protocol check that I want to document because it mattered later. He established that our 3 remaining headlamps were all primary units, fully charged. He established that each of us had a backup light and a final emergency chemical light. He established that we each had radio contact capacity, acknowledging that radio communication in cave passages is limited and unreliable. He established a time threshold. If we had not located Jill within 90 minutes of entry, we were to mark our position and withdraw to reassess. We entered the northeast passage at approximately 7 a.m. We moved through the first 190 meters quickly, calling at intervals, receiving no response. We crossed the paint line. We continued past the paint line. At approximately 80 meters past the line, which put us roughly at the furthest point we had surveyed the day before, I noticed something and stopped. The passage behind us was empty. This is not a remarkable observation. The passage was always empty except for the three of us. What I mean is, I was walking behind Marcus and Tom, and I turned around to check the passage we had come through, which was the habit I had developed in 3 days of moving through the system. And Marcus and Tom were not behind me. I had been walking behind them, in a straight passage. For perhaps 30 seconds since I had last been aware of their presence, I called their names. The cave returned my voice. I stood in the northeast passage at roughly 80 meters past the paint line, alone, with my headlamp illuminating the corridor in both directions and showing me nothing except empty passage and the geological features I had documented the day before. I want to be precise about my state of mind at this point. I was not panicked. Panic is a luxury that people with serious underground experience have largely trained themselves out of, because panic in an underground environment kills people in specific and preventable ways. I was, instead, very still and very precise, running through the available information with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned that the difference between a recoverable situation and an unrecoverable one is often a matter of how clearly you think in the first 60 seconds. Available information. I was alone in a passage in which I had been walking with 2 other people 30 seconds prior. I had not heard any sound indicating a fall, a passage collapse, or any physical event. The passage ahead and behind me was clear and structurally unchanged. Marcus and Tom had not responded to their names. I looked at the floor. The gravel and silt floor of the northeast passage, which had been receiving our boot prints for 2 days, was clear at this section. Not disturbed by a fall, not churned by any physical event. 3 sets of prints coming in. 2 sets stopping cleanly, without the shuffling or clustering of prints that any physical event would produce, approximately 15 meters behind me. The prints stopped. The passage continued. I went back to where the prints stopped. I stood there and looked at the wall beside the last print cluster. The wall was unbroken limestone, no side passage. No feature significant enough to divert attention. No indication that anything had happened at this location. 2 people had been here. They were not here. I called again. I checked my radio. Static, as expected at this depth in the system. I followed my training. I marked my position with a survey pin and a note. I made the decision to withdraw to the entrance, where the radio would function, and contact the surface team. I walked back through the passage. At the paint line, I stopped. Behind me, the passage was empty. The prints, my prints going in, now my prints going out, were the only marks in the floor. I stood at the paint line and looked at the text that the 1978 surveyor had left. We don't know what happens here. Past tense would have been wrong. The passage did not do something to them. They had come this far, as we had come this far, and they had stopped, as we had not stopped, and they had written the instruction and left. Something had happened to the people who did not stop. I crossed the paint line going out. I walked through the lower gallery. I walked through the main gallery. I reached the entry chamber. I keyed my radio and reached the surface support team. A single technician, a graduate student named Ellery Chen, who was managing the surface data station and whose job did not involve anything underground. I told her that I had lost contact with 3 team members inside the northeast passage of the Crale system. I told her I was requesting surface support and rescue protocol. My voice was steady. I noted this at the time. Not with pride, but with the particular awareness that training produces when it activates automatically. Ellery said she would initiate the protocol and that I should remain at the entrance. I sat at the entrance of the Crale Basin cave system on a September morning and looked at the tree line above the access trail and listened to the birds and the distant sound of the creek that drained the karst below. And I thought about what I had seen and what I had not seen. And I tried to construct a framework that held everything. 3 people, gone, not fallen, not trapped, not injured in any detectable way. Simply no longer present in spaces where they had been present moments before, or where their equipment placed them, or where their boot prints led and then stopped. No sign of trauma, no sign of flight, no sign of physical event of any kind, just absence. The rescue team arrived 4 hours later. A 6-person technical cave rescue unit from the regional SAR organization, experienced, well-equipped, briefed by Ellery on what I had reported. The team leader, a woman named Hartwell, sat with me at the entrance for 20 minutes before they went in, asking careful and specific questions with the professional attention of someone who has learned that the quality of information she receives before entering a cave affects whether she comes out. I told her everything I have told you. The boot prints, the absence of physical event indicators, the precise location where Marcus and Tom's prints stopped, the paint line, the 1978 notation. She listened without interrupting. You came back through the passage alone, she said. Yes, you crossed the marker line going out. And nothing, no sound, no physical sensation, no visual anomaly. Between the point where you last saw your colleagues and the marker line, nothing. She was quiet for a moment. And the photographer, Jill Parrish, her equipment was at camp. Her backup headlamp was in her kit, yes, which means she went in with a primary headlamp only, in the middle of the night, alone, without waking anyone. That's what the evidence indicates. Hartwell looked at the cave entrance. I've been doing this for 22 years, she said, in the flat, factual way of someone making a calibrated statement. People don't go into unknown passages alone in the middle of the night. Not experienced cavers. Not without something that overrides every trained instinct they have. I had been thinking about this since I had sat down at the entrance 4 hours earlier. What overrides trained instinct? What produces behavior in an experienced person that is completely inconsistent with their experience? I had considered carbon dioxide accumulation, which produces disorientation and impaired judgment in enclosed spaces. The analysis against this was the behavior's specificity. Jill had moved with direction and purpose, navigating to the junction, entering the passage. Disorientation does not produce purposeful navigation. I had considered acoustic phenomenon, low-frequency sound below the threshold of conscious hearing that produces anxiety, disorientation, or in some documented cases what researchers describe as a sensed presence. The feeling that something in the environment requires approach. There is a small body of research on this in cave environments. The analysis against it was that Marcus and Tom had also entered the passage, but in full daylight with team support, and had experienced nothing that they reported as anomalous until they were not there to report anything. I had not yet considered the thing I eventually considered, which I will tell you now because this is a complete account. The northeast passage had a consistent airflow. The airflow indicated connection to a larger system. The cave continued, past where we had surveyed, into an extent we had not mapped. Something moved through that system, not a creature, not a mechanical process, not anything that fits a category I have a name for. Something that occupied space in the way that processes occupy space, not located in a single point but extending through a volume, moving through it, doing whatever it was doing. When it passed through a section of passage, the section was processed. Things that had been in the section were no longer in the section, not removed, not relocated, not destroyed in any way that left evidence, simply no longer present in the processed space. Jill had gone in first. She had gone in at night, and I believe, though I cannot prove this, that she went in because she heard something. Not a sound that the rest of us were awake to hear. Something that reached her sleeping and drew her toward it. The way that some sounds are too low to register consciously, but register somewhere below that. She went in and reached the passage, and she was in the passage when it processed through her section, and she stopped being in the passage. Marcus and Tom and I went in after her, and we moved through the passage, and the process was moving through it from the far end, from whatever deeper extent the cave contains. And it processed through the sections ahead of us as we moved, and Marcus and Tom were in the section it processed when it processed through them, and I was 30 seconds behind them. In the section it had already passed through, and it moved on into the deeper cave, and I was left in its wake. I was not spared, I was not protected, I was not selected. I was in the wrong place at the right time, in the 30-second interval between one processing and the next, and whatever the process is, it is not continuous. It moves, it processes, it moves on. And the 30 seconds between Marcus and Tom and me were enough. I want to be clear about this because I think the temptation, when you hear this account, is to look for what was different about me. What made me survive when the others did not? And the answer, as far as I can construct it, is 30 seconds. Proximity. The spatial accident of my position relative to theirs in a linear passage. The process did not know I was there. It does not know anything is anywhere. It moves through the cave system doing whatever it does, and things that are in its path are no longer in their path after it has passed. And it has been doing this, based on the 1978 survey notation, for at least 45 years. And based on the geological record of the cave system, which I have since reviewed with considerably more interest than I brought to it initially, possibly for much longer than that. The rescue team went in. Hartwell's team of 6 entered the northeast passage and moved to the marker line and beyond it. I monitored from the entrance on radio. They reported nothing. No sign of the 3 team members, no physical evidence of any event, the boot prints exactly as I had described them. They came out. Hartwell stood with me at the entrance, and she had the expression of someone who has added new information to a dataset and is working through its implications. No sign of any physical event, she said. No sign of any person, any equipment, any indication that anything happened in that passage. The boot prints stop. The passage continues. Yes, I said. The passage continues, she repeated. We went 30 meters past the prints. I would have gone further, but I made the call to pull back. Why, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Airflow stopped, she said, about 20 meters past the prints. Just stopped. And I've been doing this for 22 years, and I've felt a lot of things in caves, and I know when. She stopped. I made the call to pull back. We looked at the cave entrance. The 1978 surveyors wrote, "We don't know what happens here," I said. Not something happened here. Not we found something here. They wrote, "We don't know." Meaning they didn't see anything either, Hartwell said. Meaning they felt what you felt. And they left. And they wrote an instruction, and they didn't explain it, because there was nothing to explain. Hartwell was quiet. There's something in the deep system, I said. I think it moves through the passage on some interval. I think it was passing through the passage when my team was in it. I think when it passes through a section, it's sectioned. The section what? She said. I don't know how to say this accurately, I said. The section is processed. And what was in the section is no longer in the section. Hartwell looked at the ground between her boots. She was a careful, experienced person, and she was working through the same analytical process I had been working through for the past 6 hours. You think they're still in the cave, she said. No, I said. I don't think they're anywhere. I need to explain what I mean by that, because I know how it sounds, and I am not using it as a euphemism for death in the conventional sense. Death leaves evidence. Death is a physical event, biological cessation with associated physical changes that are detectable, locatable, documentable. What happened in the northeast passage of the Crale system left no evidence of any physical event. The boot prints stopped. The passage continued. There was no body, no blood, tissue, no equipment, no sound, no indication of any physical transition from living to not living. They were not dead. They were absent. There is a distinction that I do not have adequate language for. And I have spent 11 months looking for that language. And I have not found it. And I have concluded that the language does not exist because the thing it would need to describe has not previously required description. Marcus Dreer, Jill Parrish, and Tom Okafor are listed as missing. The investigative conclusion of a 4-month inquiry by the relevant county, state, and federal authorities, none of whom found anything in the Crale cave system that explained their disappearance. The cave has been closed to entry pending ongoing investigation. I have been interviewed 8 times. My account has been consistent across all 8 interviews because it is the only account I have, and the details do not change because they happened. The investigation is ongoing. It will not resolve. There is nothing in the cave to find. I submitted my formal survey report covering the areas we documented before the 6th day. I documented everything I could document, and I wrote a note at the end of the survey section covering the Northeast Passage. Survey incomplete. See incident report. Do not proceed past the 1978 marker line. I did not write an explanation. There is no explanation that the survey notation format can contain. I think about Jill going in at night, and I think about what she might have heard that drew her up and out of her sleeping kit and through the camp and into the main gallery and to the junction and into the passage. What frequency registers below conscious hearing but above the level at which it produces no response. What it would feel like to move toward something you cannot name and cannot stop moving toward and cannot, perhaps, distinguish from a decision you are making. I think about Marcus's last note. Airflow changed. It felt more like it stopped than faded. I think about that distinction between a gradual cessation and an instant one, between something running down and something simply stopping, between a process ending and a process being interrupted. I think about the 1978 surveyor's choice of phrasing. We don't know what happens here. Not something dangerous. Not something threatening. Not turn back. Just we don't know. An honest statement of the limit of their understanding. I am in the same position. I was in the cave. I was in the passage. I was 30 seconds behind the point where the process moved through, and 3 people were in the section it processed, and I was not, and I walked out. I do not know what it is. I do not know what it does with what it processes. I do not know whether the cave system extends far enough that what moves through it is itself contained, or whether the Northeast Passage is one corridor among many in a system that extends under the plateau for distances we have not mapped and may not be able to map. I know that the airflow from the passage was consistent on 6 days of the survey and absent on 1 morning, and that Marcus noted it and documented it. And the note is in the survey record, where it will sit until someone reads it. Who knows what it means? I know that the Crale Basin system has not been fully surveyed. I know that whatever the 1978 team found uncomfortable enough to paint a warning across the full width of a passage is still there, and still moving through the system on whatever interval it moves on, and the paint lines are still on the wall at 190 meters past the lower gallery junction, and the text is still faded but legible, and the passage continues past it for further distance that I cannot tell you because we did not finish the survey. I know that there is something in the deep cave that does not know we exist. I know that is not a comfort. I know that Jill and Marcus and Tom were competent, careful, experienced people who did everything correctly and were in the wrong section of a linear passage at the wrong time and are now not anywhere that I can document or locate or account for. I know that I was 30 seconds behind them. I know that I am writing this in a lit room on an upper floor of a building that I have chosen deliberately for its distance from any enclosed underground space, and that I sleep with the window open because I find that I cannot be comfortable in rooms where the airflow is not immediately detectable, and that I have not been inside a cave since September and do not intend to be. I know that the northeast passage of the Crale system continues past Von where we stopped surveying, and that whatever it connects to extends further into the plateau, and that nothing moves through it on any schedule that I can determine because the only data points I have are a morning when the airflow was absent, a morning when it resumed, and a period of approximately 30 seconds in a cave passage when something passed through the space where my colleagues were standing. I know that 30 seconds is a very small interval. I know that I keep thinking about this.